The morning of my divorce hearing, my husband walked into the courtroom smiling like he'd already won. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive navy suit, glanced around the room, and then looked directly at me. There wasn't a trace of sadness on his face, no regret, no hesitation, only confidence. He leaned close enough that only I could hear him. "You'll leave here with nothing." A slow smile spread across his face. Behind him sat the woman he'd been seeing for nearly a year. She crossed one leg over the other, looked me up and down, and laughed just loud enough for everyone nearby to notice. She doesn't deserve a single dime anyway. A few people in the courtroom shifted uncomfortably. I didn't answer. I didn't even look at them. Instead, I reached into my briefcase, pulled out a sealed envelope, and quietly placed it beside my attorney. "Please," I whispered, "give this to the judge when the time is right." She looked at me for a moment, then nodded. "I will." 5 minutes later, the judge opened that envelope. He read the first page, then the second. His expression changed. He removed his glasses, looked directly at my husband, and quietly said 4 words that changed everything. "Well, this changes things. My name is Rachel Carter. I'm 38 years old. Most people who saw me sitting quietly in that courtroom probably assumed I was frightened, maybe defeated, maybe broken. After all, my husband was the successful one. He owned a software company worth millions. His face appeared in business magazines. People called him a visionary entrepreneur. I was simply listed in the court documents as spouse. But what nobody in that courtroom knew was that long before Ethan Carter became a successful businessman, he had been a man with nothing except an impossible dream, and I had been the one standing beside him. 15 years earlier, life looked very different. I was 23 years old, working as a junior accountant for a small manufacturing company. My apartment wasn't much to look at. The furniture came from thrift stores. The kitchen table wobbled whenever someone leaned on it. But I loved my little home because everything inside it belonged to me. I had earned it honestly. One rainy Thursday evening, my best friend convinced me to attend a networking event downtown. "I promise." She laughed. "Not everyone there wears boring suits." I almost stayed home. Thankfully, I didn't. That was where I met Ethan. He wasn't wearing an expensive watch. He didn't drive a luxury car. He had a wrinkled shirt, worn-out shoes, and carried a backpack instead of a briefcase. But his eyes, they were full of ambition. He spoke about software the way artists talk about paintings. "I know people think I'm crazy," he admitted during our conversation, "but one day I'll build something that changes lives." Most people would have smiled politely. I actually believed him. That was the beginning. Our first dates weren't expensive dinners. We walked through parks, shared coffee, talked for hours about our dreams. He told me he wanted freedom. I told him I wanted stability. Oddly enough, those two dreams fit together perfectly. 2 years later, we got married. The ceremony was small, just close friends, family, homemade decorations. Neither of us cared about luxury. We cared about building a future. The night after our wedding, we sat on the floor of our tiny apartment surrounded by unopened gifts. Ethan squeezed my hand. "I've been thinking, that's usually dangerous," I teased. He laughed. "If I start my software company now, it'll probably fail." I frowned. "Why?" "Because I won't be able to give it everything." I looked at him carefully. "What are you really asking me?" He hesitated. "I want to try." I stayed quiet. "But if I do, we'll probably survive on your income for a while." I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I stood, walked into the kitchen, poured 2 cups of coffee, and returned. I handed him one. "Then let's build it together." His eyes filled with tears. "You'd really do that?" "I didn't marry your paycheck." I smiled. "I married your dream." He wrapped his arms around me so tightly I could barely breathe. "I swear," he whispered, "one day all of this will belong to both of us." At the time, I believed every word. The first year was harder than either of us imagined. His company had no office, no employees, no investors, just one second-hand computer sitting on a folding table in our spare bedroom. During the day, I worked full-time. At night, I helped him organize invoices, answer emails, and review budgets. Sometimes we'd still be awake at 2 in the morning, trying to figure out how to pay next month's bills. There were weeks when we lived almost entirely on pasta and canned soup. Whenever I apologized for not having more money, Ethan would shake his head. No, he'd smile. We're investing in our future. So I kept believing. As the months passed, financial pressure grew worse. One afternoon, Ethan came home looking defeated. He dropped a folder onto the kitchen table. What happened? The investor backed out. I felt my stomach sink. Completely? He nodded. They said, software startups are too risky. Silence filled the room. Finally, he looked at me. I think maybe everyone was right. I reached across the table and took his hand. Do you still believe in your idea? Yes. Then why would you quit because someone else doesn't? He stared at me. You always know what to say. No. I smiled softly. I just know you. The next morning, I quietly transferred part of my savings into our joint account. He noticed that evening. Rachel, we need payroll. You've worked years to save this. So have you. He shook his head. I'll pay you back, I laughed. We're married. There is no paying me back, there is only us. Over the next several years, that became our routine. Whenever the company struggled, I worked overtime. Whenever bills piled up, I found another way to stretch our budget. When the refrigerator broke, I delayed replacing it. When my car needed repairs, I refinanced it instead of buying another. When my friends invited me on vacations, I politely declined. Every sacrifice felt temporary. Every delay felt worthwhile. Because I believed we were building something together. Late one evening, after another 16-hour workday, Ethan found me asleep at the kitchen table with company receipts spread around me. He gently placed a blanket over my shoulders. When I woke up, I found a handwritten note beside my coffee mug. I couldn't do this without you. One day, everything we build will belong to both of us. I folded that note carefully and placed it inside a file folder. At the time, I kept it because it made me feel loved. Years later, that single piece of paper would become far more important than either of us ever imagined. After nearly 7 years of sleepless nights, rejected pitches, overdue bills, and endless uncertainty, Ethan's company finally caught a break. It started with a single software product. One large logistics company agreed to test it. Neither of us expected much. It's probably just another meeting, Ethan said as he straightened his tie that morning. I smiled and kissed his cheek. Then go show them what you've built. 3 days later, my phone rang while I was at work. The moment I answered, I heard Ethan laughing, not the polite laugh he used with clients, the genuine, uncontrollable laugh I hadn't heard in years. They signed, Rachel. I smiled so widely, my cheeks hurt. They actually signed. Not only that, he said, almost shouting. They want a 3-year contract. I closed my office door and let out a happy scream. For a moment, every sacrifice felt worth it. Every late night. Every unpaid vacation. Every dollar we'd counted twice before spending. That evening, we celebrated with takeout pizza because it was still our favorite meal. We should go somewhere expensive, I joked. He laughed. Maybe next year. I leaned my head against his shoulder. We finally made it. He wrapped his arm around me. No, he whispered. We made it. Those words stayed with me for a while. The company grew faster than anyone expected. Within 18 months, Ethan hired dozens of employees. Then hundreds. He opened offices in 3 different states. Business magazines featured him on their covers. Podcasts invited him as a guest. People who had ignored him for years suddenly wanted his advice. I watched everything with pride. Whenever someone congratulated me, I'd smile and say the same thing. He earned it. Because he had. But success has a strange way of changing people. At first, the changes were small. He started missing dinner because of meetings. Then weekends disappeared. Business trips became more frequent. Our conversations grew shorter. "How was your day?" I would ask. "Busy. Did the presentation go well?" "Fine. What time will you be home tomorrow?" "I don't know." The man who once talked to me for hours now answered in single words. I told myself it was temporary. Growing a company wasn't easy. He was under pressure. He was exhausted. So I kept making excuses for him. Months passed. One Saturday morning, I placed a graduate school brochure on the breakfast table. For years, I'd postponed earning my master's degree because we couldn't afford it. Now we finally could. "Ethan," I said carefully, "I've been thinking about applying this fall." He barely looked up from his phone. "For what?" "My master's in finance." He frowned. "Why?" The question caught me completely off guard. "What do you mean, why? You don't need another degree." I laughed nervously. "I've wanted this since before we got married." He shrugged. "Seems unnecessary now." I stared at him. "I thought we'd agreed I'd go back once the company was stable." He sighed impatiently. "Rachel, I'm just saying it doesn't make financial sense." I looked around our beautiful new kitchen. The marble countertops, the designer furniture, the luxury coffee machine. None of it had existed when we'd struggled. "We can afford it." "That's not the point." "Then what is?" He stood and grabbed his car keys. "I have a meeting." He walked out before I could say another word. The front door closed. I sat alone at the table. For the first time in our marriage, I wondered whether my dreams still mattered to him. The distance between us grew wider. Sometimes Ethan came home after midnight, sometimes not until morning. Whenever I asked where he'd been, he had an answer ready. "Investor dinner, client emergency, flight delay." I believed him, at least. I wanted to. Then little things began catching my attention. He started locking his phone. His laptop suddenly required a password. Calls that once happened openly were now taken outside. If I entered the room while he was texting, the screen went dark. None of those things proved anything. But together, they felt different. One evening I folded his jacket before sending it to the cleaners. A restaurant receipt slipped from the pocket. 2 dinners, 2 desserts, a bottle of expensive wine. Tuesday night, the same Tuesday he'd told me he'd worked until midnight. I stared at the receipt, then quietly placed it back. No accusations, not yet. Weeks later, while organizing tax documents for our accountant, I noticed several hotel invoices. At first, I assumed they were from conferences. But something didn't match. One reservation was made during a weekend. No business convention, no company event. Another hotel was only 30 minutes from our house. There was no reason for him to stay there. I checked his calendar. Nothing. I checked his travel schedule. Nothing. A knot formed in my stomach. Still, I said nothing. I wanted facts, not suspicions. After 15 years together, you learn someone's routines, the way they speak, the way they avoid eye contact. The way silence can reveal more than words. Ethan had changed. He smiled less around me. He laughed more while texting someone else. He became protective of things he'd never hidden before. One evening, while he showered, his phone lit up on the kitchen counter. I wasn't trying to invade his privacy. I simply glanced at the screen. A message appeared. "Can't wait until this is finally over." The sender's name wasn't saved, just an initial. The message disappeared before I could read anything else. My hands began to shake. That night I barely slept. I kept replaying every conversation we'd had during the past year, every canceled dinner, every late-night meeting, every unexplained trip, every excuse. Had I really been that blind? Or had I simply trusted the man I loved? There's a difference. 3 weeks later, I received my answer, completely by accident. I had stopped by Ethan's office to surprise him with lunch. His assistant smiled politely. I'm sorry, Rachel. Mr. Carter already left. Oh, he said he had a strategy meeting downtown. I thanked her and turned toward the elevator. As the doors opened, I heard Ethan's voice from a nearby conference room. The door wasn't fully closed. He couldn't see me. I'll handle the divorce soon. My heart stopped. I just need everything positioned first. A woman's voice laughed softly. You've waited long enough. I know. I just have to make sure the company is protected. The room became perfectly silent, not because they had stopped talking, because I couldn't hear anything over the sound of my own heartbeat. I turned around, walked back to the elevator, and left without making a sound. I drove home in complete silence. No music, no phone calls, no tears, just silence. When I opened the front door, the house looked exactly the same as it always had. Family photographs, vacation souvenirs, the framed picture from our wedding. 15 years of memories. Suddenly, it all felt like someone else's life. That night I sat alone in the living room until sunrise. I didn't cry, not because I wasn't hurting, because the pain was too deep for tears. Around 6 in the morning, I stood up, walked into my home office, opened a file cabinet, and removed every financial record I'd saved since the day we married. Every bank statement, every tax return, every loan agreement, every mortgage payment, every email, every receipt. I stacked them neatly across my desk, then I picked up my phone. There was only one call left to make. Good morning, the receptionist answered. Law offices of Linda Morales. I took a slow breath. My name is Rachel Carter. I need to speak with a divorce attorney. Those words changed the direction of my life forever, but they also marked the moment I stopped preparing to save my marriage and started preparing to protect the truth. 3 months after I hired Linda Morales, the day of the divorce hearing finally arrived. By then, almost everyone in our circle had already chosen a side. Some believed Ethan's version of the story. Others avoided taking sides altogether. Very few people knew the truth, and I intended to keep it that way, at least until the facts could speak for themselves. That morning, I arrived at the courthouse nearly 40 minutes early. I wanted time to think, time to breathe. The marble hallway echoed with quiet conversations as attorneys hurried from one courtroom to another. Linda joined me a few minutes later, carrying 2 thick binders. She smiled gently. How are you holding up? I looked out the tall courtroom window. I've been better. She nodded. That's an honest answer. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she placed one hand on the stack of files. Everything we need is here. I looked at the binders. Years of my life had been reduced to documents, bank statements, tax returns, mortgage records, Megamounds loan agreements, receipts. Every sacrifice I'd made was preserved in black ink on white paper. It felt strange. The most emotional years of my marriage were about to be discussed in the least emotional way possible. Numbers, dates, evidence. Maybe that was exactly what justice required. The courtroom doors opened. Everyone stood as the judge entered. After everyone was seated, the clerk called the case. Carter versus Carter. I slowly stood beside Linda. Across the room, Ethan adjusted his tie and confidently walked toward his table. He looked polished, relaxed, almost cheerful. Behind him sat the woman I'd overheard in that conference room months earlier. She wore an expensive designer dress and carried herself like someone attending a celebration instead of a divorce hearing. When our eyes met, she smiled. I simply looked away. Ethan leaned toward me just before the hearing officially began. You still have time to settle. His voice was almost friendly. I offered you more than you deserve. I kept my eyes forward. I'll let the court decide. He chuckled softly. That's going to be expensive. I didn't answer. Some conversations simply aren't worth having. The judge reviewed the preliminary paperwork before looking toward Ethan's attorney. You may begin. The attorney stood confidently. Your Honor, Mr. Carter built an innovative software company through years of extraordinary dedication, personal risk, and entrepreneurial vision. He paused dramatically. While Mrs. Carter was his spouse during those years, the evidence will show she had no meaningful involvement in the creation or successes of the business itself. I noticed Ethan nodding confidently. The attorney continued. The company exists because of Mr. Carter's talent, leadership, and sacrifice. Therefore, we respectfully request that the court recognize it primarily as his individual achievement. The courtroom remained silent. The judge made a few notes, then he turned toward Linda. Mrs. Carter? Linda stood calmly. She didn't rush. She didn't sound angry. Your Honor, before addressing those statements, my client respectfully asks the court to review one additional document. She reached into her briefcase, removed the sealed envelope I had given her, and handed it to the clerk. The envelope slowly made its way to the judge. Ethan barely looked at it. He whispered something to his attorney and smiled. Whatever he thought was inside. He clearly wasn't worried. The judge carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a simple timeline, nothing dramatic, no emotional language, no accusations, just facts. He began reading. The first entry read, March 2011. Rachel Carter transferred $28,000 from her personal savings into the company operating account after expected investor funding was withdrawn. Supporting bank records attached. The judge turned the page. September 2012. Rachel refinanced her personal vehicle to reduce monthly expenses, allowing additional household income to support ongoing business operations. Supporting loan documents attached. Another page. February 2013. Rachel postponed graduate school indefinitely while maintaining full-time employment and paying the majority of household expenses. Supporting financial records attached. The judge slowed down. He reread several entries, then he reached for the larger exhibits already submitted to the court. He began comparing dates, quietly, carefully. No one interrupted him. The room was so silent I could hear papers sliding across the bench. Then the judge stopped at one particular document. It wasn't a bank statement. It wasn't a tax return. It was an email, dated. Verified. He adjusted his glasses and read it silently. His eyebrows lifted slightly, then he read it again. Finally, he looked toward Ethan. Mr. Carter? Yes, Your Honor? Did you write this email? Ethan looked toward his attorney before answering. I believe so. The judge read a portion aloud. I couldn't have kept the company alive without you. Someday everything we build will belong to both of us. Silence. The judge picked up another email. Thank you for covering the mortgage again. Every investor meeting is possible because you're holding everything together. Another. One day I'll repay every sacrifice you've made for me. The courtroom remained completely still. Those weren't my words. They were Ethan's, written years before success changed him. The judge continued reviewing the financial records. His expression grew more serious with every page. Then he looked directly at Ethan again. Mr. Carter, yes? You testified that after the company's first year, it became financially independent. That's correct. The judge held up one exhibit. Can you explain this? Ethan leaned forward. So can your attorney. His attorney quickly reviewed the document, for the first time all morning. Neither of them spoke immediately. The judge continued. This bank transfer shows $28,000 deposited into the company's operating account. He placed another document beside it. And this withdrawal, made on the very same day, comes directly from Mrs. Carter's personal savings account. He looked at Ethan. Is there another explanation? Ethan swallowed. No, Your Honor. The confidence in his voice had disappeared. The judge wasn't finished. He opened another file. You also testified that household expenses were independently managed. He lifted several documents. Mortgage payments. Health insurance premiums. property taxes, utility bills. These records indicate Mrs. Carter paid virtually all household expenses for nearly 4 consecutive years, while the company operated at a loss. He paused. Is that accurate? Ethan looked toward his attorney. His attorney quietly cleared his throat. It appears. He stopped. The judge waited. Finally, the attorney nodded. Yes, Your Honor. I still hadn't looked at Ethan. I didn't need to. I could hear the change, his breathing, the nervous tapping of his fingers. The confidence that had filled the room earlier was gone. The judge continued reading. Then he found one final section inside my timeline, a handwritten note, scanned and preserved. The same note Ethan had left beside my coffee mug years earlier. I couldn't do this without you. Everything we build belongs to both of us. The judge read it silently, then carefully placed it on top of the other exhibits. He looked toward me. Mrs. Carter. Yes, Your Honor. You organized all of these records yourself? I did. He nodded slowly. It shows. Then he looked around the courtroom. This submission is remarkable, not because it is emotional, not because it is persuasive, but because it is consistent. Every document supports the next, every date aligns, every financial record confirms the timeline presented. He paused for several seconds, then turned toward both legal teams. In light of today's testimony and these newly organized supporting records, the court orders an independent forensic review of all financial disclosures before any final decision regarding asset division. The room remained silent. The judge gathered the documents neatly into a single stack. Then he looked directly at Ethan. Mr. Carter? Yes, Your Honor? If these records are accurate, and at first review they appear to be, they raise significant questions regarding the financial narrative presented to this court. He closed the file. We will reconvene in 3 weeks. The gavel struck once. The hearing was over. People slowly began leaving the courtroom. Reorters waiting in the hallway looked confused. Some had expected a quick decision. Instead, the case had taken an unexpected turn. Linda quietly smiled at me. You did exactly what I hoped you would. What? You let the truth speak. For the first time in months, I felt something I hadn't allowed myself to feel. Hope. Not because I knew how the case would end, but because the truth was finally impossible to ignore. As Ethan walked past me toward the exit, he stopped for just a second. His face had lost every trace of the confidence he'd worn that morning. He didn't say a word. He simply looked at the stack of documents in the judge's hands, then walked away. I watched him disappear down the courthouse hallway. 3 weeks earlier, he had whispered, "You'll leave here with nothing." Now, he wasn't smiling anymore. 3 weeks passed more slowly than I thought possible. Every morning, I woke up wondering whether the court-appointed forensic accountants had found everything. Not because I doubted my records. I didn't. I had spent 15 years documenting our finances. Every paycheck, every mortgage payment, every loan, every transfer, every sacrifice. The truth wasn't hidden. It was simply waiting for someone to read it carefully. Linda called me twice during those 3 weeks. The review is going exactly as expected, she reassured me. They've requested a few additional documents, but everything matches your timeline. I thanked her and hung up, then I went back to work. People often imagine that waiting for a court decision is dramatic. For me, it wasn't. Life didn't stop. Bills still had to be paid. Laundry still needed folding. Groceries still needed buying. The only difference was that every night, I fell asleep wondering how 15 years of my life would ultimately be measured. Would it be measured in dollars? In percentages? Or would someone finally recognize the quiet work that had never appeared on a balance sheet? The morning of the final hearing arrived. I dressed more simply than I had during the first one, a navy blue suit, minimal jewelry, no attempt to impress anyone. I wasn't there to perform. I was there to hear the truth. As I entered the courthouse, I noticed Ethan standing alone near one of the windows. The woman who had smiled at me during the first hearing wasn't beside him. Neither were the confident expressions or easy laughter I'd grown used to seeing. He looked tired, older, as though the previous 3 weeks had aged him far more than the previous 3 years. When he saw me, he gave a small nod. For the first time in months, there was no arrogance in his eyes. Only uncertainty. I nodded back. Nothing more needed to be said. Inside the courtroom, everyone took their places. The atmosphere felt completely different from the first hearing. No whispers, no confident smiles, no dramatic predictions, just quiet anticipation. The judge entered exactly on time. After everyone sat down, he opened a thick report prepared by the forensic accounting team. He adjusted his glasses and began reading. The court has completed its independent review of the financial documentation submitted by both parties. His voice remained calm and measured. The investigation confirms that Mrs. Rachel Carter made substantial and well-documented financial contributions during the formation and early development of Carter Technologies. He turned another page. The evidence further confirms that Mrs. Carter assumed primary responsibility for household expenses for several consecutive years, allowing company revenue to remain available for business operations. Linda quietly squeezed my arm. I remained still. The judge wasn't finished. Additionally, the review identified several statements made during earlier testimony that were incomplete when compared with the verified financial record. Across the room, Ethan lowered his eyes. No one interrupted. No one objected. There was nothing left to dispute. The documents had already spoken. The judge continued. Under the applicable law, the court finds that the marital estate must be divided based upon the verified evidence rather than unsupported assumptions regarding ownership or contribution. He reviewed the settlement figures one final time. Then he looked toward both attorneys. The court therefore approves an equitable division of the marital assets. That was it. No dramatic speech, no shouting, no celebration, just fairness. After months of uncertainty, justice sounded surprisingly quiet. The clerk announced that the matter had been concluded. The gavel struck once. My marriage was officially over. People slowly began leaving the courtroom. Attorneys packed their briefcases. The court reporter organized her notes. The bailiff held the door open as everyone filtered into the hallway. Within minutes, the courtroom was almost empty. Only Ethan and I remained. For several long moments, neither of us moved. Finally, he stood. Rachel. I turned toward him. He hesitated before speaking. I've been trying to figure out what to say. I waited. He gave a small, exhausted smile. I don't think there are enough words. I said nothing. He looked down at the empty counsel table. When the company started growing, I convinced myself that I had built everything alone. He laughed bitterly. It was easier than remembering how hard those first years really were. His voice became quieter. I kept telling myself those sacrifices didn't matter anymore. He finally looked at me, but they did. His eyes filled with regret. I erased you from the story because admitting the truth would have meant admitting I never could have done it without you. The silence between us felt strangely peaceful. There was no anger left, only honesty. I never wanted credit, I said softly. I know, I helped because I loved you. He nodded. I understand that now. Another long silence settled over the courtroom. I'm sorry, Rachel. The apology sounded genuine. Maybe it had taken losing everything he valued to finally understand what he had thrown away. Maybe some lessons arrived too late. As I walked toward the courtroom doors, Ethan spoke once more. I hope you're happy. I stopped. Without turning around, I answered honestly. I don't think happiness begins the day a marriage ends. I looked back at him. But peace can. Then I walked away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally moving forward. The settlement became official a month later. Friends expected me to celebrate. Some suggested buying a luxury home. Others told me to take a long vacation. Instead, I did something I'd postponed for nearly 15 years. I enrolled in the graduate finance program I'd once given up. Walking into that classroom on the first day felt surreal. Most of my classmates were nearly a decade younger than I was. At first, I wondered if I'd made a mistake. Then I remembered something I'd once told Ethan years earlier. It's never too late to build the life you imagined. This time, those words belonged to me. I graduated with honors 2 years later, not because I wanted to prove anything to anyone else, because I wanted to prove something to myself. That dreams postponed aren't always dreams abandoned. Shortly after graduation, I opened my own consulting firm. My goal wasn't to become the biggest financial consultant in the city. It was much simpler. I wanted to help small family-owned businesses avoid the mistakes we'd made. Young entrepreneurs came to me full of excitement. Many of them reminded me of Ethan 15 years earlier, passionate, determined, optimistic, but whenever couples sat together across my conference table, I always offered one piece of advice. Never underestimate the value of the person quietly holding everything together behind the scenes. Some smiled, some laughed, most didn't fully understand. Not yet. Several years later, I received an unexpected email. It was from Ethan. The subject line simply read, "Thank you." Inside was a short message. Rachel, today, our company celebrated its 20th anniversary. During my speech, I told everyone the truth. I said the company wouldn't exist without the woman who believed in it before anyone else did. I should have said those words years ago. I'm sorry it took me so long. I read the message twice, then I smiled. Not because I needed the apology anymore, but because the truth had finally reached the person who needed to hear it most. Him. I closed the email without replying. Some conversations don't need another chapter. People sometimes ask whether I felt victorious after the divorce. The answer surprises them. No victory suggests someone had to lose. That's never what I wanted. I didn't want revenge. I didn't want humiliation. I didn't even want recognition. I wanted honesty. Because honesty has a quiet strength that revenge never will. The courtroom didn't give me my value. The settlement didn't create my worth. The judge didn't decide who I was. Those things simply revealed what had always been true. For years, I believed my value depended on whether someone else appreciated my sacrifices. I was wrong. My worth had never belonged to Ethan. It had never depended on a marriage. It had never rested inside a courtroom. It had always belonged to me. One evening, after locking the door to my office, I stood on the sidewalk and looked back through the glass. The lights inside reflected everything I had built. Not someone else's dream, mine. I smiled, because the greatest thing I walked away with wasn't part of any legal settlement. It wasn't money. It wasn't property. It wasn't even justice. It was the confidence to know that no one could ever again convince me that my quiet sacrifices didn't matter. And that was the strongest foundation I would ever build. The end.